Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Wild Gunman. Wild Gunman was the very first game on the NES to use the NES Zapper, a unique peripheral for the NES that could detect changes of light on the TV screen. While most of us in the West may remember this device looking like a futuristic orange or gray ray gun, it actually looked a lot like a revolver in Japan. While I can't find any official accounts from Nintendo as to why exactly they made this change, I can imagine it was probably because the Japanese version of the Zapper looked a little too realistic. Toy guns that looked like real guns were starting to be seen as an issue in the West, and around this time, laws were even made in the US that restricted just how realistic toy guns could look. If you saw my first summary video on Color TV Game 6, you'll know that this wasn't Nintendo's first time using technology like this. Before Nintendo even made something that resembled a video game, Nintendo made light gun toys in the early 70s. These toys were designed by Nintendo veteran Gunpei Yokoi and would feature electronics that would respond when shot at by the toy guns. While not a light gun toy, around this time, Nintendo also created a tabletop game called Wild Gunman. In this game, players would launch small metal balls at the opponent's character and try to knock it down. Not too long after this, Yokoi teamed up with Masayuki Uemura and Genyo Takeda and created the laser clay shooting system, which brought their light gun technologies to abandoned bowling alleys, and customers would aim at targets on a projected screen. Side note, but I find it interesting that these three designers would all go on to lead Nintendo's first three design teams once the company started making video games. In an attempt to bring this technology to arcades, in 1974, Nintendo merged their light gun technology with the themes of their board game and created Wild Gunman for the arcades. This machine would show footage of real recordings with actors, and when your opponent's eyes would light up, you would need to fire at the Wild Gunman on the screen. Soon after this, Nintendo also created a toy called Custom Gunman, which fell over once you shot at its weak point. You may actually recognize this toy from WarioWare on the GBA, which featured the toy in one of 9Volt's retro-themed minigames. Nintendo's history with light guns didn't end there, as they actually teamed up with Magnavox to develop the very first home console light gun, the shooting gallery for the Magnavox Odyssey. Looking at all this history Nintendo had with light gun technology, it now seems like a no-brainer for Nintendo to make a light gun peripheral of their own for the NES. The first game they launched that would use this was a remake of Wild Gunman from the arcade and was given the same name, Wild Gunman. Alright, let's take a look at the actual game. One thing you may notice is that my camera setup is a bit different. For this game, you need to play on a CRTV for the gun to actually work, so for this one I am facing my TV instead of one of my monitors. In this game, there are 3 game modes: 1 Outlaw, 2 Outlaws, and Gang. I started with the 1 Outlaw mode. In this mode, 1 of 5 possible outlaws will slowly approach the center of the screen. The outlaw will wait an indeterminate amount of time before suddenly shouting "Fire," after which you have to aim at the gunman and fire in a quick enough time. By aim at the gunman, I mean fire anywhere on the screen. When pausing the footage during a fire, you can see that the white hitbox covers the entire screen. White hitboxes like this is what the gun uses to detect whether or not you are aiming at the right target, so in this game's case, anywhere on the screen is a hit. If you fire fast enough, the gunman is defeated, and you earn some points based on how high the bounty was for that particular gunman. Each gunman has a different defeat animation, with the silliest one being the tall skinny guy whose pants just fall down. If you lose, the screen turns red, and the third movement from Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2 is played, which is most commonly known as the Funeral March song. You'll also lose a life if you fire too early, resulting in a foul. In the corner before a match starts, you can actually see how fast the gunman is. At first, they are pretty slow, giving you over a second to respond to the shot. As you start doing better, they eventually start getting much faster. While the timing changes over time, each of the different gunmen will generally have a different speed from one another. The hardest gunman is the guy in the coat, and the quickest I saw him fire was 400 milliseconds. When taking a test online, I found my reaction time is on average 190 milliseconds. There's probably some delay when it comes to pulling the trigger, but I should be fine with this game, right? Well, for the most part, I think I did well enough in this mode. Ultimately though, this game is a high score chaser, so it doesn't really matter how far you go, there's no real ending in this one. At first, I got through 15 gunmen flawlessly, but on my 16th gunman, I wasn't really paying attention to how fast he was. He was the first guy to require me to fire in 400 milliseconds, and I don't think I was really giving him the proper respect he deserved, and I lost my first duel to him. I decided to try a bit harder after this, and I made it to gunman 42 before losing a second life. On this guy, I panicked for some reason and shot early, earning me a foul. I kept going even longer after this, and I made it all the way to the 75th Gunman before I finally lost my last life. At this point, I was talking with my chat quite a bit, and I was getting pretty distracted. Another coded gunman showed up with that brutal 0.4 reaction time, and I lost my last life. This one caught me pretty off guard, and I dramatically fell backwards in defeat. There's like recipe books, actual just... One of my YouTube commenters jokingly said this was one of the best death scenes he had ever seen in a Western. I was happy enough with my score of 75, so I moved on to the next game mode, 2 Outlaws. As the name suggests, this mode faces you off against 2 outlaws at once. Once it is time to fire, you must now shoot both of the outlaws quick enough. Similar to before, we can pause on the frame where I fire and see that you just have to aim at either the left side or the right side. In this mode, it was essential to look at the times below each of the gunmen, since you needed to prioritize the faster gunmen to do well. You have to be careful though, sometimes one of the gunmen won't actually try to fire at you, and you'll get a foul if you fire at them. This mode ended up being a bit more tough for me. On the 8th pair of gunmen, I already encountered a 400 millisecond requirement. This timing was especially brutal in this mode, since you needed to make sure they were actually the ones firing before pulling the trigger. This added enough delay in my mind that I didn't make it, and I lost my first life. I made it a little bit further, but both of my next losses were kind of strange. I'm not exactly sure what even happened. I think I was moving my gun too quickly to the side, which caused my first shot to be registered on the opposite side instead. At gunman pair number 13, I thought I fired at the gunman on the right first, but the pants on the guy on the left fell down before I ended up losing. Either I somehow missed half of the entire screen, or I moved too quickly. My last life, which I lost immediately after on the 14th pair, was also lost in a similar way. This time, I only needed to fire at one target, although I instinctively moved to the other guy just in case after making my first shot. To my surprise, the guy on the left was shot, which ended up being a foul. Honestly, I'm still not totally sure what even happened here. Anyway, I only made it to 14 gunmen in this mode, but I was content enough with the score, and I moved on to the gang mode. In this mode, you are firing at a whole gang of outlaws at a saloon. They pop out of the windows and the door, and you have to aim at the correct spot of the screen as they pop out. You have a limited amount of bullets for each wave, so you can't just spam like crazy either. After enough outlaws are cleared, the wave is complete and you immediately advance to the next one. Not gonna lie, this mode was kinda rough for me. Those coat guys were just brutal in this one, since you had to move to the precise spot now before firing. I ended up only making it to wave 8 before losing all 3 of my lives. Again, there's not really any clear goal for this one, so I was fine with clearing at least one wave. With that, Wild Gunman was complete. On to the review. While the core idea behind this one is fun enough, it definitely feels like it lacks a whole lot of substance. They get a little creative with the aiming of the light gun in the gang mode, but the other 2 modes feel like they could have been easily done with a controller instead, so all the light gun really adds is some novelty. Being able to test your reaction time and take out outlaws like this is fun for a bit, but it quickly loses its luster and becomes repetitive quickly. In the end, I gave the game a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.